and I'm really pleased to be hosting this session, our first cafe focused specifically on working with the media. Now, we all know the life-changing impact of occupational therapy, but it isn't always visible to the wider public. And that's where media and engagement comes in. It's one of the powerful ways that we can raise awareness, challenge outdated perceptions, and help people to truly understand what occupational therapy is and why it matters. Whether you're a student or just starting out, or an experienced OT in a leadership role, using your voice in public conversations is a powerful way to advocate for the profession. It helps position occupational therapy where it needs to be, at the heart of health and social care. And here's the good news: as an occupational therapist, you already have the skills you need to do this. Media engagement is also a great opportunity for your own personal professional development, building confidence in how we communicate, telling our stories, and representing the profession publicly is valuable CPD experience. One of that strengthens both your individual practice and our collective voice. So to kick things off, we're going to start with a quick poll to just get a sense of how confident you're feeling at the moment with working with the media. I think that's just popped up on the screen. Brilliant. Thank you, Chanel. And then we'll revisit the same question again at the end of the session, just to see if there's been a little bit of a shift. We are today absolutely delighted to have Mark Easton with us. I'm hoping Mark's been able to join us whilst I've been talking. And Mark is the BBC's home editor and one of the most respected journalists. He spent decades reporting on social issues that shape our lives: health, housing, justice, and community. And he brings a deep understanding of how stories connect with the public. His work is known for its thoughtfulness and humanity, and we're incredibly grateful to have him here with us today to share his insights on how professions like ours can work more confidently and effectively with the media. In just a moment, Samantha Bandak, our press and media lead, will lead a Q&A session with Mark, and after that we'll open up for a few of your questions. Please add them to the chat throughout and we'll pull them out as we go through that discussion. After that, we'll then hear from our very own Lauren Walker. Lauren's a professional advisor here at RCOT, as well as a occupational therapist. And she's brilliantly represented occupational therapy in a range of media interviews. She's going to share what that's like and what she learned from that experience. And then before we wrap up, Samantha will talk through our media toolbox so you know what resources are available to support you in feeling more confident and prepared to share your story. Now, before I hand over, can I just check with colleagues? Have we got Mark here with us? And are we okay to go to that session? Or will we start with Lauren?
I'm here.
You're here. Fantastic. That's wonderful news, Mark. So I will now hand you over to Mark. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to hearing your insights. Over to you and Samantha.
Hello, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us today. Obviously got, I think, over 20 years of experience. Would you mind starting by telling everyone here a little bit about your career and how you got into journalism and where it's taken you?
Well, I started, my first job was on my local newspaper in 78. Yes, I really am that old. And I decided to be a journalist about 5 years before that. When I was on holiday with my parents, and we played Waddington's, which is a terrible board game which pretends to be a Fleet Street. It was a very rainy day on holiday, and we needed to do something to keep ourselves active. So we played this game, and it changed my life. I decided that's what I'll do. So as I say, I left school. John.
Sorry, could everyone who's not a speaker, could you mute yourselves, please? Sorry, carry on.
And then BBC in 1986. Hello.
Sorry, Mark, do carry on.
Yeah, so I joined, I was in radio first. I went into my local newspaper, then I fell into radio, did that for a while, local radio, worked for LBC in London. Then I joined the BBC in 1986 on a programme called London Plus, which was presented in those days by Jeremy Paxman. and then I moved to BBC Breakfast, which was also presented in those days by Jeremy Paxman. And then I moved to Newsnight, which was also presented by Jeremy Paxman. And then his career stalled, and I carried now. Anyway, it was yeah. I spent sort of 10 years at the BBC. Went away. Was a political editor at Channel 5. Senior correspondent at Channel 4 News. 21 years ago in my current role as home editor, which, as you rightly say, is really about trying to stand back and tell the story of British society and the British country.
Thank you for that very swift recap of your entire career, but that's really helped to kind of put it into context as to who we're talking to. So a lot of the people here today are obviously occupational therapists. Their primary job isn't working with media, it's working with people. So for someone who doesn't have any media experience, do you have any tips of how to start, how to get started with approaching media?
Sorry, just to jump in briefly, Mark, your sound's still a bit intermittent. So do you mind turning your camera off?
Yes.
That might help us.
Okay. I can do that. Right. I'm now invisible, but you can see, you can hear me, I hope, slightly better now. Is that right? Is that good?
Yes, we can hear you.
How's it going? Sort of not very good. I will try and answer your question. The first thing that people need to understand is that journalists are desperate for good stories. They want to appear that they know stuff, that they're on top of things. So please don't be nervous about approaching a reporter with a story idea. If you can get an email, a mobile number, just send them stuff, mail them, text them. Don't be embarrassed. Just make sure you can put your story idea under their nose. And I think in terms of tone, I think be friendly, be informal. We haven't met, but I just thought this might be right up your street kind of thing. Make journalists feel important. We love to be flattered. Oh, I know you've written about this before, so I'm sure you'll understand why this new thing is something that we all want to consider. I think the ideal reporter, these are the kind of things that get journalists interested. The other thing I'd say is journalists love a freebie. So can I buy you a coffee to explain this idea? That kind of thing goes down really, really well. But the most important thing I would say is you just have to remember that journalists are just as worried about getting the stories that they want as you get your story on the news.
Very, very good point. And do you have any tips for how, you kind of touched on it, but how can our members or people getting in touch with journalists, how can they make their emails or their pitches really stand out? Is there anything that would make you stop and look at a headline, a subject line, for example?
Well, reporters often very busy people, lots of things flying around, lots of competing forces on their time. So you obviously need to make your idea clear, and you need to make it compelling. Actually, what is the new thing that you want to be included on the news? What is the hook that is going to grab attention? So don't hide the story. Put it in the email title. Put it in the first line of the text.
And what kinds of stories
you need
do you
in a
think?
way to think like a journalist, work out what the story is, because sometimes. Well, I was just going to say, sometimes I think what we're trying to do work out story is, and sometimes it's not that clear. Is imagine that I'm having a cup of tea or a beer or whatever. The beverage actually is not important, but and then you're with a friend and you're going to tell them the thing that you're trying to you think they ought to know. We've got this this new machine at work, which is really making a difference to people. Or, you know, Doreen celebrating 40 years in OT next week, and treasure trove of knowledge and wisdom. Or I'm really worried that, you know, the cuts to this or that is going to have a big impact on some very vulnerable people. So, you know, really work out what it is. What is the key point? What is the story that you're trying to get across? And if you think of it in the same way as if you're chatting to somebody in the pub or in the cafe, I think you'll come a long way, because what we often try and do too much to try to sort of deconstruct it in our heads and be a bit too clever about it. You know, so I can see that the sound is still so bad, but I can do no more. Apologies. But anyway, that's what I'm thinking is that really you to work out what the story is.
Thank you. Yes, we can hear you. It's just a bit intermittent and jumping a bit. And
okay.
You kind of touched on this a little bit, but what types of stories would journalists either kind of, you know, for somewhere like the BBC or more local organisations, what types of things do you think journalists would be interested, and especially from people working in health and care? We have people from kind of education backgrounds, social care backgrounds. What kinds of stories should they be thinking about?
Yes, I see someone suggested I put headphones on. So I'm going to do that. If you bear with me one second, I'm going to put my own the sound. I don't know whether it will.
Yes, no problem. It's worth a try, isn't it?
Well, we're just waiting for Mark to do that. I can see a couple of questions coming in the chat, which is fantastic. If anybody's got any other questions, please do pop them in there.
Yeah. I don't know whether that's better or worse.
At the moment, it's about the same. But
which
we'll
we
see
can hear you. So
yeah. Okay. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you.
Well, we'll carry on like this.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry about this. I don't know what's going on today.
Don't worry.
Yes. So I was saying, as a national journalist, I obviously want stories that have national. So that is about, I think, particularly in the area we're talking about here today, that is a.
You're breaking up a little bit more now, actually.
In the particular and moving it to the general. So money, you know, okay. Whether I can bear with me, so go to 4G again to see if that might be better than the Wi-Fi.
Sorry about these technical difficulties.
Okay, I don't know.
Let's try that for a minute, and if not, we'll jump to Lauren and then try and come back.
Oh, hello. I'm now back on. Can you hear me?
We can hear you much better now, actually.
Oh, great. Oh, well, we'll carry on.
Let's try that.
Yes. Well, the wonders of modern technology. It's so good when it works. Yeah, I was just really explaining that, you know, if you're trying to get a story on the national news, I'm a national journalist, so I'm looking for stories which can tell a story. The story needs to have national implications, basically. So you're talking about stories that move from the particular, from the kind of human case study, as we might put it, and move it to the kind of general. So I was made up story about 9-year-old Martina and needs a new prosthetic arm, can't get an appointment. It's a personal human story. But then, you know, for me, what I'd be looking for is, that's interesting, but I need some figures to go with that, showing, I don't know, the average wait for a child to get an OT appointment has risen to X number of weeks, whatever it might be. We need that top line to get it over the bar. And then we do want the human story. So we want both. But it is really important that you have that top line, the story in a simple sentence, something that's genuinely newsy, that has a sort of national resonance, that someone go, oh, that's interesting. And then you bring in the sort of personal human stories, and the interviews with your members and so on to sort of try and unpick exactly what's going on.
Great, thank you. I think we've got time for one more question from me, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. So what are the most common mistakes that people, in your experience, that people tend to make when they're dealing with the media, and any tips for avoiding those types of mistakes?
I think let's talk about interviews here. Let's talk about the business of being interviewed on the media. And I think that the mistake that people make more than anything else is basically they try almost too hard. So we turn it around the other way. After we do an interview for radio, TV, or social, whatever it might be, our job will then be, in the jargon, to pull the clip or clips of the interview, to find 15 or 20 seconds that's going to work for us in telling the story. I probably hear it actually as it's going through. I'll probably be, oh, that bit works in my head as I'm doing an interview. But certainly afterwards, I'll go through the interview to identify, 2 or 3 bits perhaps that would work in terms of telling the story. So what's amazing is how often you do a 5-minute interview, really struggle to find that key 15 to 20 seconds. And sometimes it's because the interviewer's done a rubbish job, hasn't asked the right questions, hasn't got the interviewee relaxed and sort of in the right place. But sometimes I think it is because the interviewee is actually trying. They've almost overthought the thing. And one big mistake I think is when an interviewee sits down with their piece of paper, with the kind of 5 paragraphs they've been rehearsing that they think they want to get across. So I really stress, please don't write it down. Don't have a crib sheet, because it will look and it will sound really false. It will sound inauthentic. But the best way to get your point across, listen to the questions as they're asked, answer as naturally as you can, because if it's a normal conversation, if it's the kind of chat you might be having over a cup of tea, honestly, that is the most powerful way of getting your point across. So I think don't be my advice.
Excellent advice, thank you. We'll go to some of the questions from the chat now. So I think the first one that we've got is what's the best way to source which emails to reach out to? How do we find emails for journalists?
It's a very good question, and not a particularly helpful answer, because often it can be quite tricky. I mean, what I would say is that most journalists are not hiding. They want to be found by people because they want those stories. So if you can find out what the kind of email code is, the BBC, it's something at bbc.co.uk. So my email at the BBC is mark.easton@bbc.co.uk. There are a few people in the BBC who don't want to be found, and they put all kinds of weird things in their emails, so they're not easy to guess. But most journalists, I think, will want to be found. So see if you can find the sort of way in which the organisation puts its emails together, and just try that. I think most of the time it will work. Other ways of doing it, LinkedIn it can be quite useful. A lot of journalists on LinkedIn, and if you go into their profile, often there'll be a contact there. You can contact them, using social media and other ways as well. These days, I get requests from all kinds of different routes. But the most, even to this day, I'd say 90% content are on email, and quite often people will just have sort of what my email is, and if I'm interested in following it up, I'll respond. Of course I will.
And I would just add to that as well, that when it comes to regional publications, quite often you can either have a look on their website or in the print version of the paper, and they'll usually have at least one email address for you to contact. So if you're looking to get in touch with your local paper, that might be a way to do it as well. Thank you, Mark. This is a similar question, but it's a bit more specific. Is there a good starting point for making contact at the BBC before I made contact with a range of Today producers, Victoria, Derbyshire producers, or individuals? Is going for individuals the best way? And that's specifically about the BBC, I think.
Well, I think, in all honesty, yes, I think it probably is. I think those personal relationships are going to be much more important than, just sort of trying to get a sort of flat email through the BBC planning system is probably going to be a less successful strategy than finding a journalist who you've got a relationship with, talking to them directly, and getting their support to sort of try and navigate a story onto the planning grid and hopefully into some kind of story. So I think there are, I'm sure many of your members will know, and those people involved in the comms side of things will have sort of generic emails for BBC planners. And we certainly will consider it for the same rules that apply to all journalists who want stories. The BBC also wants to make sure that it's considering everything that's going on. So that's not a no, but I think that if you've got a specific story, or you're looking to place it in a particular place on the BBC, which is it's a big old organisation with a lot of outlets, then that personal touch, finding the individual journalist who you've worked at getting a relationship with, that is definitely going to be the most powerful way.
I agree. Thank you for that. A practical question now. As OTs, do we need to write the story and present it to a journalist, or would a journalist interview us and write it themselves? And when it comes to photographs, would we provide these, or would they be taken by the publication?
Well, it kind of depends, really. There are certain stories which will be press released, and you'll really kind of guided the journalist very carefully on what you think is the angle on the story, and then backing that up with perhaps quotes and statistics and other things. You may even provide a few photographs. It varies from publication to publication. At the BBC, we generally don't like to use sort of B-roll or other people's photographs. We like to have our own, but not always. We're pretty cool about it these days. I think in terms of the story, it depends. As I say, if it's a story and what the story is you're trying to sell, it's a straightforward sell job, basically. The press release or the media release, that does the job. If it's something a bit more sort of less formal in a way, and you're approaching a journalist with a thought about something, then it's a slightly different game. I think you'll definitely going back to what we were just talking about. If you've got your favoured journalist, you might just say, look, we're just thinking about doing this. Would you be interested? Maybe we can have a coffee and think about what top lines and what you might need to get it over the line. So there's a bit more of a kind of negotiation. So I think it really does depend on the kind of story we're talking about, the kind of way it's being promoted.
Thank you. We've got one now about data protection and consent. The question is, how would we promote occupational therapy when the core success has been with one person in brain injury rehabilitation, but we would need to protect their data or their identity? Who would approach the person with regard to data protection, consent, etc.? So I guess she's asking if it would be that person as the occupational therapist, or if it would be the journalist or someone else. or if there's other ways of promoting that story without having to reveal that person's identity.
Where there are issues like this, it's absolutely the job of the BBC to make sure that we obey all the rules, that we absolutely ensure that we don't use somebody's image or words without getting their express permission. And where we're dealing with vulnerable people, then all kinds of other questions come into play. So, you know, we have endless sort of training sessions on how we need to behave when we're dealing particularly with the kind of situation that you just described. So my way of dealing with this is, if somebody doesn't want to appear or even be heard on the media, and that is their settled decision, then of course that's absolutely fine, and we're not going to try and do it without their permission. There are questions though, which people sometimes need to think about, because it's and I've done this many times, where you have a proper conversation with someone. You say, okay, look, there are lots of ways we can do this. You know, you can not appear at all. We can disguise you so that we kind of see you. We can have somebody else's voice. We can use actors. You know, there's all kinds of different ways in which we can protect people's identity. But what I would also say to people is that the most powerful storytelling is through human stories. It is about people. It's being able to see into somebody's eyes and understand their experience. So it can make a real difference to have that human story. So that you need to sort of balance those two things. Thinking about obviously that person's. I mean, sometimes it can just be because they're just very nervous, and they're, you know, oh, I don't want to do that. That's too much. And actually, with time, and I've done this again many times, where you go and you meet somebody, you spend time with them, not with cameras, not with equipment. You just say, let's just chat, just for 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, over a cup of tea. Talk about what you want to achieve from this process, and at the end of it, almost without fail, people feel reassured. We come to a decision about how we're going to do it in a way that they feel comfortable about. And more often than not, they actually end up being slightly more sort of involved in the process than they'd imagined they would be at the start. And then again, my experience is that they are so glad they did it afterwards. That they realised that it is often that the powerful human story. But to go back to the sort of start of this answer, we do have really very detailed protocols on how we deal with all these questions of identity, of information, data, and so on. We go to extraordinary lengths to make sure that we obviously this is both legal but also ethical and fair. So while we'd obviously work very closely with the people that we were working with an organisation, we go through the whole process. We'd obviously like to work with people rather than sort of turn up with it. This is how we're going to do it. It is very much our responsibility to make sure that we protect people when necessary.
Thank you. Hopefully that's reassuring. We do have more questions in the chat, but we have to move on. Mark, is there any chance you'd be able to stay on for a few minutes and answer some of those questions within the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. As long as you like.
If not, don't worry, but if you're able to do that, then I think people would really appreciate having their questions answered if possible. But really sorry that we've got to cut you off.
Please carry on.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. It's been really lovely having you here. I'm sorry we couldn't see you, but we really appreciate your time, and hopefully people have learnt a lot from what you've just told us. We're going to move on now.
Put my camera on very briefly.
Yes, put your camera on so we can wave to you. We actually can't see you, even though we can see that the camera's come on, but we still can't see you. I'm going to hand over now to Lauren Walker, who is one of our professional advisors here at RCOT. She's going to talk about media interviews based on her own experience and give you some tips and some things to think about. So over to you, Lauren.
Thank you very much. Can you see and hear me? I got a slight nod then, I think. That's a relief. Hooray, hooray. I don't know about anybody else, but I find it deeply reassuring that even the BBC's home editor has issues with his Wi-Fi. Journalists are human beings, folks. There's no need to be scared. But I think I've also realised that my Wi-Fi now seems to be slightly wonky. So someone please shout at me if I need to switch my camera off, and I will. Maybe I live on the same road as Mark. You never know. I might bump into him in Sainsbury's. Anyway, yes, I'm Lauren. I'm one of the professional advisors here at RCOT, and I have had the genuine pleasure actually of participating in a number of media opportunities in the years that I've been here. So I'm going to attempt to share some slides with you that kind of summarise the learning that I've had from being involved in those opportunities. Come on, teams, do what I want you to do. Some of it is kind of reiterating some of the things that Mark has already said, which is a relief, I have to say. It looks like it's doing something now. But the main thing to say to you all, which Thea said right at the top of the event, is that you absolutely all already have the skills that you need in order to be a brilliant media spokesperson. I can see that my camera is going wonky, so I'm going to switch my camera off because you don't need to see me. My slides are more important. So let's do that, and hopefully that will help. Okay. Who can I see? Thea, can you nod at me if you can see my slides? All right.
I can see your slide.
Amazing. Thank you very much. All right. Here we go. Yeah, you have all the skills that you already need to be a brilliant media spokesperson. And how do I know that? Well, it's because I'm assuming that if you are in this room, then you are an occupational therapy practitioner, and it's completely true to say that all the skills and the knowledge that you've developed through your training and through your practice are absolutely transferable to activities like talking to journalists, and they will come in very, very useful. And frankly, if I can do it, any of you can. I had no media experience before I joined RCOT, and I am lucky that since joining I have had some media training, but that wasn't, I'd done various media things before I had that training, and so I was able to draw on the skills that I'd developed through my OT career, and they stood me in very, very good stead. So in my time here, I've done radio interviews, I've done print interviews for various local and national newspapers. I was on Radio 4 Woman's Hour a couple of years ago, which was deeply terrifying and deeply exciting in equal measure. I've not quite made it to the breakfast sofa yet, but there is still time. So I have got a range of experience that I can draw on. And just to kind of emphasize that point about your assets, really, these are all the things that I have used when I've been preparing for media interviews and being involved in interviews. And this is stuff that you use every single day. It's all in your OT toolkit. So you will all be experts in gathering information. You know the importance of being prepared and in knowing who it is that you're going to be speaking to. And you know how important it is to recognize people's motivation. And that's exactly the same for journalists as it is for your patients and service users. What is it that they want to get from their interaction with you? And aligned with that, we know that we need to tailor our communication style to the people that we're dealing with in order for that communication to be effective. Also, oh, someone's nicked me slides. How's that happened? Oh, crikey. What is going on with these gremlins today? Hang on, let me try and reshare. Doing anything? No, of course not. Right, I'm going to attempt to keep wittering whilst I try to sort my slides out as well.
They're on the screen now.
Are they? I can't see them on mine. That's fantastic. Has it gone back to the beginning? It has, I think, hasn't it? Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this is all the stuff that you do on a daily basis. As Mark's already said about the importance of data, actually, and having kind of a snappy figure that you can use that demonstrates the veracity, the truthfulness of what you're saying is always really helpful, and we know that from our practice. And we're also massive advocates of positive risk taking. So I would urge you to apply that to yourself as well. It might feel frightening participating in an interview, but it's worth it. I'm assuming, again, simply by the fact that you're in this room, that you're passionate about occupational therapy and you want other people to be passionate about it. And talking to the media is a way that we can do that. We can achieve that. But there's things we can all do. It's not just about me as an employee of RCOT doing that. We need and we want you to share your stories as well. So feel the fear and do it anyway, is what I would say on that. And just to further over egg the pudding, you can apply your preparation in the same way that you would apply the OT process to working with a client or a patient or a service user. So the key things are to do your homework in advance. So do your preparation before you get in there. Think about the intervention, kind of use a specific skill set within the intervention to get the best out of it, and then reflect afterwards. What went well? What could have been improved? What would you do differently next time? So it's no different at all, really. So I'm going to talk a bit more to each of those ideas. So the idea of preparation, then the interview itself, and then how you can reflect afterwards. And again, this is all from my own personal experience. So what I've learned from being involved in various interviews, but also what I've learned from the media training that I've had, which was conducted with professional journalists. So again, hopefully will give you some reassurance as to the credibility of what I'm telling you. And preparation is key, as it is with any occupational therapy intervention. So it's as well to find out in advance exactly who will you be talking to. So the named individual, but also the organisation that they work for, because that impacts the kind of tone that you might take, the kind of vocabulary that you might use, essentially, and the angle on the story that you want to give them. And Google is your friend here. Most journalists will obviously will have an online profile, so you can go and have a look and see what it is that they've already done, see what their interests are and what their own knowledge base is, and that might be reassuring for you to help you with your preparation. Also really important to know what format the interview will be in. So I would suggest that it's good to prepare differently for a print interview than it would be to a radio interview or a TV interview. So making sure that you're really confident with what that format is going to be is incredibly important, because you don't want to be kind of tripped up and caught by surprise on the day. And also, it's always a good idea to ask if you can see the questions in advance. It might not be possible, but no journalist will mind you asking that question. And even if they can't give you the definitive questions, they should certainly be able to give you an idea of the subject matter that they will want to cover and the kind of angle that they will want to be taking. And as Mark said, the journalists want this to go well just as much as you do. So it's to everyone's benefit if you can be as prepared as you can be. Just to expand a little bit more on this idea of knowing your audience, I've already touched on the idea of understanding what type of organisation or publication they work for. And this comes into about how we're chameleons, really, I think, as occupational therapists. We're really good at moulding ourselves to the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So the more you know about the publication itself, the more you can kind of familiarise yourself with the kind of tone of voice that they use, the kind of language that they use, and that's all really, really good prep. So it's about knowing who they are, what story is it that they want to tell, and who is their audience, because again, remember, you're going to be talking to a journalist, but then that is going to be fed back to a much wider audience. So again, all part of your preparation. But as Mark has already said, there is something to be said for over preparing. So I would suggest think like Goldilocks. Now, this feels really difficult, especially if you're not used to talking to the media. And I know the first few times that I was asked to be interviewed, I literally spent hours writing myself copious notes and teaching myself chapter and verse about the subject that I was going to be talking on. And it was worse probably than if I'd underprepared, because I'd got all this stuff rattling around in my brain and I found it impossible to pull out the bits that were most important. So definitely don't underprepare, because then you will be rather nervous, I would imagine, and might get egg on your face. But equally, don't convince yourself that you have to be the world's expert on whatever it is that you're being interviewed on. You don't. All you need is some clear, concise, consistent messages. So plan those key messages in advance, but do expect to be flexible in the context of the interview, because you can't 100% predict exactly what you are going to be asked. But I was also being interviewed is actually a team sport. Now, you might be the individual who's there sat on the red sofa with Nagam and Chetty. You might be the person who's speaking on the radio, but there are people around you who can help you to prepare in advance. So some of you, perhaps if you're working with NHS trusts, will have a comms team or a media lead within your organisation. Really, really worthwhile speaking to them, not least because you may need to get their permission to be interviewed in the first place. But they should be able to provide you with hints and tips. They might have some prepared key messages that you can use, or photographs, stock photos maybe, that you can provide to the journalist. So definitely speak to your comms team. You might find that within your colleagues, within your family, within your friends, you've got people who do have media experience that you can share with you. And even if not, you've got us. So do reach out to me and Thea and Samantha and the team here at RCOT via the hello@ email, because we want you to succeed as well. We really want you to champion occupational therapy, so we'll do everything that we can to help you to prepare for that experience. You never need to feel alone in it. And this is the final bit about preparation. And again, I would caveat this with don't feel that you need to over prepare. But giving it a dry run is really helpful. So one of the brilliant things that I was able to do when I had the media training was that I had a dummy run of a telephone interview with a journalist who was going to be putting something into a newspaper. I had a dummy run in a radio studio, and then within a TV studio as well. Now, not everyone is going to get that luxury, but you can certainly have a dry run of being interviewed by a friend or a colleague, and all of that will help to settle your nerves, I would suggest. One other thing I want to say on this is that sometimes when we're nervous, we can fall into patterns of speaking that feel really comfortable, and for a lot of us that speak in the health and care system, that does involve jargon and it does involve acronyms. So go back to thinking about who your audience is going to be, and just make sure that you're comfortable with using language that will be accessible and understandable to an audience who probably aren't going to be health professionals. Okay, so now we are on the day, we are in the moment, we are being interviewed, and here I'm assuming that you are being spoken to by a journalist, either on the phone, in a radio studio, in a TV studio. So sometimes, especially obviously if it's going to be for print media, you might have a phone call which is then written up into a written article. So that is probably the least nerve-wracking experience, because it's not kind of going live, if you see what I mean. There will be an opportunity generally to have some comment or editing on what will ultimately go into a newspaper. However, obviously, if you're going to be on a live radio or TV show, you need to be as calm, cool and collected as you can be in advance. And, you know, we've all had mental health training as occupational therapists, even if mental health isn't your current area of practice. So we know that there are really practical things we can all do for ourselves just to try and de-escalate those feelings of nerves and anxiety. So do stop and pause, do take a deep breath. I've put there in about having pause words, and that's kind of a neat little trick whereby if someone asks you a question and you need a little bit of time to mull it over, you can say something like, oh, I'm really pleased you asked me that, or that's an extremely interesting question. And just having those stock phrases will give you just a little bit of breathing space for your brain to whir and prepare what you want to say next, rather than there being this kind of deafening silence while you get your thoughts in order. And someone told me recently about striking a power pose, and I thought it was ridiculous, but I did do it before I went on Woman's Hour, and it did help a little bit, I think. So get yourself in a toilet cubicle or somewhere private and pretend to be Wonder Woman, essentially. Strike a power pose, and yeah, if we can make ourselves confident physically, then maybe it will trick our brains into feeling that we're a little bit more confident than we actually are. And this is really important. And Mark said exactly the same thing about being authentic. Be yourself. Don't try to pretend to be something that you're not, because it will show. So have absolute confidence in your knowledge. You don't, as I say, need to be the world's expert on falls prevention or whatever it might be. You've been invited to be interviewed because you are known to have the knowledge. So don't let imposter syndrome overtake you. Have confidence in what you know. But that said, if you're asked a question that is completely outside of your comfort zone or your scope of practice, or it doesn't feel relevant, you're not obliged to answer it. You can deflect the question. You can maybe try and steer it into a slightly different subject. So don't feel that you have to put yourself in a position where you have to answer something if you don't feel that you know enough about it or you don't know the right answer. So be true to yourself, be true to your position, but don't doubt your own skills, because as I say, you have all the skills and the knowledge that you need to be able to do this effectively. Now, something I'm not doing a brilliant job of right here and now, but get to the point. And again, Mark said this. So be clear and be concise. So prepare those key messages in advance. And that will be just, maybe 3 bullet points, maybe less, that you absolutely want to get across in your interview, and get them across as soon as you can. If you get opportunity to reiterate them, then great. But don't get tricked into sort of waffling or setting the scene. Get those key messages out as quickly as you possibly can. The next bit I touched on in the previous slide, but don't be frightened by curveballs. Sometimes you might get asked something that feels a little bit off-piste or off subject. Again, you don't have to answer it, but what you can do, there's a technique that's taught, which is called bridging. And that means that you don't ignore the question, but you steer it back to the thing that you actually want to talk about. So a way of doing that might be, oh, that's a really interesting question, but what I'd really like to talk to you about is this. So you can acknowledge, but then steer it back. And that's really helpful. I've done that a few times in interviews, and journalists are prepared for it. They know damn well that bridging is a technique that is commonly used. So just use those little tips and little hints to get you back on track if you feel it's going in a slightly weird direction. And finally, again, something that Mark said, but do focus on what you've been asked, not just what you want to say. It's really important that the journalist gets what they need from the interaction. So that's not to say you have to answer everything, but do make sure you're listening to what's being asked of you, rather than sitting there with reams and reams of paper that you've pre-prepared as a script. The worst thing you can do, in my experience, and I know this because I did do it in the early days, was prepare like a pages long script of everything that I wanted to say, because the journalist came away with very, very little that they could actually use. So do answer the question that you've been asked, even if it is to go, that's an interesting question. What I'd like to tell you about is this.
Lauren, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We're running a bit behind time. Would you mind sort of summarising your last couple of slides, and then we'll move on to the last section.
Of course,
we will share the slides afterwards.
Yeah, I'm very, very close to the end. So yeah, we've
Sorry.
already talked about data. Gather it in advance, have those percentage points and those real life stories at your fingertips, exactly as Mark said. Yeah, real stories are incredibly powerful, and we'll get you through the door with journalists, no doubt. And then finally, this is just the reflection piece. So shout about what you're doing. Tell us what you've been doing, and we will shout for you. And do take time to reflect. You know, it's a really big deal talking to the media. It's not something that we're trained for necessarily, or that any of us get to do with much regularity. So do take time to reflect by yourself with your teams, and absolutely upload something to your CPD portfolio. But yeah, feel the fear and do it anyway. It's good fun, actually, believe it or not. But so yeah, bite the bullet, reach out to people, and let us know how we can support you. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and sorry for cutting you off there. We were hoping to be able to have some questions for Lauren, but if you do have any questions for Lauren, please do put them in the chat, and we'll try and get to them later on, and try and answer all of your questions. Just for the last section today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we offer in our package, in our profile raising package. I think Thea's shared the link to it in the chat, but this is just so you know a little bit about what's available to you in terms of support. So first of all, to say, obviously, as Lauren said, you can always get in touch with us via hello@rcot.go.uk, and we'll be able to offer you support in terms of kind of reviewing a press release or a bit of preparation for a media interview if you've got one coming up, or just a chat about what you think your story might be. So do get in touch with us. I do have a question for all of you, so please put your answers in the chat. What engagement have you had with media? I know that some people have already been sharing their experiences in the chat, but it would be really good to know what contact you had and what that felt like as well. I've got here a few examples of the types of media coverage that you could be looking at getting. So we've got there a new hospital marking its 10th anniversary, an event being held highlighting health and wellbeing support, a school that's specifically focusing on children with special educational needs and disabilities and helping them get back into education. A therapy garden. I've seen actually quite a lot of stories about therapy gardens, so that seems to be something that's quite popular for various parts of the media at the moment. And then this one in Down News was one that we got ourselves as RCOT about looking at data, and we found that in Northern Ireland some people were waiting over 3 years to see an occupational therapist. So that's just an example of some of the types of stories you could be thinking about to share with media. And as some of this is kind of repeating what's already been said, but it's also just kind of reinforcing it. So again, like if you've ever actually been interviewed by media, I know some people have already shared that, but if you've ever been interviewed by media, I'd love to hear about that experience. So this is kind of just summarising what's already been said, but start with thinking about what you want people to remember. What's the one thing that you want people to come away with after they've read a story about your service, or they've heard you being interviewed? What's that one thing? So identify your story. If you have a press office or comms colleagues, do get in touch with them. They'll be able to support you. They probably would be the ones actually pitching the story to media, so that takes a load off you. And they'll be able to also give you advice about what that story could be. If you don't have a press office, then hopefully all the resources and tools we've provided for you will help you. And again, yeah, do get in touch with us for a chat and we can support you. One relatively easy thing you could do is you could phone into a radio show. So I think there was a question in the chat earlier about if you hear a story, or if you see a story that you'd like to comment on, how do you do that? On a radio show, you can usually just phone in right there and then and say, I'd like to add my voice as an occupational therapist to this story. If it's something that's online or in print or broadcast, you can't be quite as immediate, but there are usually ways to do that. You could kind of find out which journalist had created that story and write to them and say, I'd like to add my point of view, and then sometimes they'll get back to you, sometimes they won't. We've already talked about finding local journalists and how to find their email addresses. Pitching your story, again, think of that one line that you really want people to remember and go in with that first. We have a press release template and sample pitch email as part of the toolkit. So have a look at those. That might help you get started. And we can have a quick look over press releases and help you strengthen them if you need us to. And probably the last thing to remember is if you are using a story that is not your own, for example, someone accessing your services, please do get their permission. Please don't ever get in touch with a journalist about someone else's story without asking them first. So this is pretty much the end. Thea is going to do a wrap up at the end. We're going to have a second poll in a minute. But just to summarise, decide what you want to achieve with your story and who you're trying to reach. Find a story that will help you do that. Decide how you want to share it. Do you want to try and get a broadcast interview? Are you trying to get it into your local paper? All of this can also be supported with, for example, your own social media work. After a news story appears, you can share it on social media and help improve the visibility of that story. Do use our toolkit, and we are planning on hosting more cafes, either for specific parts of the toolkit or more general ones, so do keep coming to the cafes as well. And if you have a really interesting short story, share it with us, because we are always looking for stories, particularly from people accessing services alongside the OT that worked with them, to really bring that human element. So with that, I'll hand over to Thea to close. I think the second poll has just popped up, so if you could reply to that as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Samantha. And thank you, everyone, from those that have spoken with us today, Mark and Lauren, but also thank you all for taking the time to come along today. I know we had a few little technical issues, but hopefully that didn't detract from what feels like a really brilliant session. One thing that was really clear to me that came across from everybody's session is that it's so important to be authentic, to be confident in your expertise, but also to be bold in reaching out. We've already run the poll there, so we've got a chance to answer that. That would be fantastic. And if you're feeling inspired to get more involved in our campaign work, do let us know. Hopefully you've all activated your new online account, but if you have, or even if you haven't yet, if you do that, go into your contact preferences and select profile raising under the topics that you're interested in, and that will ensure that we keep you up to date on any future cafes and opportunities. And while you're in there as well, look out for your CPD portfolio and add that you've attended this event and your learning reflections from today. If you haven't, the poll hasn't worked for you, if you can just pop it in the chat. So the question was, how confident do you feel in raising the profile of occupational therapy, with 5 being the most confident and 1 being the least confident? If you just pop the number in there, we can take that into the contribution for the poll. Thank you. And then, as we've talked about before, you've got the whole profile raising session. We talked a lot today about storytelling. There's a whole section there around storytelling. So I really encourage you to engage with that. And just before we finish, if you'd like to pop into the chat, what's the one thing that you're going to take away from today that you have either what you're going to do next, or how this helps you to proceed and things like that. And we'll also continue to share about profile raising, not only in these cafes in the toolkit, but also within OT News. I think Keir mentioned an article that we've got in there, so please look out there for future articles. And it just finishes for me today, just a couple of moments past the time. So thank you all so much for your contributions and for working with us to raise the profile of occupational therapy. Hope you all have a good afternoon.